Welcome to the Medovia Menopause Podcast, Business Edition, your trusted source for insights on menopause and midlife in the workplace. Each episode features meaningful conversations with inspiring guests. Tune in and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Medovia Menopause Podcast, Business Edition. Today, we are going to talk about workplace advocacy and policy for women's health, and we're joined by two special guests, Jack Tuckner and Catherine Crider, with Tuckner, Sipser, Weinstock, and Sipser on the show. They're New York's leading women's rights in the workplace law firm. They have represented hundreds of women and men against all forms of unjust workplace conduct, and they have been advocating for women's rights since 1999. Thank you so much for doing what you do. We're looking forward to having you on the show today. So maybe to start us off, either one of you, if you want to jump in, Catherine or Jack, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, give us a little bit of background, and how you got started doing what you do?
Thank you. Thanks for having us, April.
Absolutely.
Catherine, would you like to go first? Or?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you so much, April. We're excited to talk with you and your listeners today. My name is Catherine Crider. I was originally a teacher who realized that my passion was a bit more behind the scenes in the law and the policy side. So I went back to law school. When I went back to law school, I had to slightly change my career a bit, so I wasn't lesson planning at night. And in doing that, I started teaching preschool, which led me to realize that I had a passion for doula work. Through doula work, I ultimately ended up realizing that how I wanted to use my law degree was to help women in women's health-related fields, which led me to Jack, because Jack's is one of the few firms that focuses so heavily on women-related issues, specifically pregnancy and menopause-related workplace issues.
Great. What an interesting background. I love hearing stories from working with schools, preschool, doula, to now women's health in a law firm. So super interesting. Thanks for doing what you do, Catherine. I'm sure we'll hear more about your work in just a moment. Jack, how did you get started?
Well, I'll try to Cliff's notes this a little bit, and you'll rein me in if I go too off. But listen, April, I never, I hated lawyers as much as the next person for much of my life, for the same reasons people, often say. Lawyers, they're out for themselves. It's all about money. They're in, more about corporate interests, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't, and I dropped out of college. I was a psych major back in the day. Then I dropped out to pursue an acting career and spent 2 years in a conservatory, and then did the usual what young actors do, which is tend bar and wait on tables, etc. But at some point, and actually the exact point was in the early 1980s, so you'll know how long I've been around, where my law school, my alma mater, the City University of New York Law School at Queens College, had just opened with a mandate, law in the service of human needs, a public interest law school, that was just dedicated to actually empowering, the underserved. So it spoke to me. I applied. I was in the second graduating class. I started out as a public defender back in very difficult times when Rudy Giuliani was running New York, and I was a public defender in the Bronx, which was, for those who know, the Bronx was it was a difficult, challenging time, but it sort of formed the basis of my abilities in a courtroom, which was very important. And from there, once I had the foundational boots on the ground competencies to effectively advocate for folks, I asked myself, what's next? And it came to me, and without getting too dramatic about this, given my background and my, my dislike of bullies and oppressors of all kinds, that women, this was now in the 90s, women were still facing rampant pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment, gender pay disparity, unequal pay, sex discrimination of all kinds on every level. And there was no area of law for this. There was no one practicing this specifically. So I endeavored at the beginning as a sole practitioner to open up this law firm in 1998, New York City, dedicated to women's rights in the workplace. So that's, the basic background on this. And if I may say, what I all thought initially was that most of the cases would be sexual harassment. In fact, I was sort of marketing, if you will, to that. Turns out the largest type of cases that I saw and still see are pregnancy discrimination cases. So that sort of opened my eyes to like, wow, this is when women are working or have careers, jobs they want to maintain, and then they get pregnant. This is when things go south. Still do, because companies resent it. They know that you're going to be out for at least for 3 months when you have a baby. They know you're going to need flexibility during your pregnancy. And, in a profits over people culture, you were, I believe, April, in HR for a while, right? And that when we're talking about bottom line issues, which American companies typically, that's their whole raison d'etre, make money.
Right.
Pregnancy, you're going to lay people off who are pregnant, who are coming back from maternity leave. So anyway, I spent 25 years banging my head against the wall with pregnancy cases. And the more I trained other lawyers, I teach continuing legal education seminars on how to effectively try pregnancy cases on behalf of employees. And so that was essentially my life's work. And I was deeply in it on every level in terms of advocating and being one of the stakeholders that was pushing for, in New York City, we had a Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the first in the country 11 years ago now. We were all part of getting that ultimately enacted. May I tell you now about?
I do. That was my next question. I think you're going to tell me what that is. And I would love to hear, and I know that our audience would love to hear as well, because I don't think that the majority of us understand that it even exists. So tell me a little bit about that.
So here's the thing. So before 1964, and again, just rein me in when I talk a lot. Before 1964, there was no sex discrimination, was perfectly legal. You could say, I'm not hiring you because you're a girl. Perfectly legal. And again, to me, I was alive, right? I mean, it's not that long ago. Until 1974, men had to co-sign their wives' applications for credit cards or loans. Okay, so this wasn't that long ago that all of this was happening, where clear women were, sort of essentially second-class citizens, to my way of thinking. Then in 1978, we got the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which was an extension of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it says you can't discriminate because of pregnancy. But that did virtually nothing. What it meant is if an employer said to you, we're not going to hire you because you're pregnant, and you had proof of that, that was illegal. But when it came to things like, what about during your pregnancy when you need flexibility? What about when you need to eat at your desk to stave off morning sickness? What about when you need to use the restroom more frequently, or you can't drive as much, or you're in pain, orthopedic issues? You need to see your OBGYN. You need some type of accommodations. You're moving more slowly. You need to sit, you need to stand.
Right.
The Pregnancy Discrimination Act didn't really address that. And it also didn't address, and here's kind of the clincher, there was no law that said that you're entitled to recover from childbirth. You were not entitled to maternity leave. And so employers, unless you were covered by the Family and Medical Leave Act of 1978, but that requires that you work for a company with at least 50 employees, not 15 like most of the other federal laws. And many women don't work for companies of that size. And you had to have worked there a full year before your water broke. Okay, so that's another reason why. So I would represent women who companies would say to them, but I'm sorry, when your due date comes and you told us when it is, you're not here a whole year, so sorry. You don't get maternity leave. And the lawyers I would speak to would say, explain to me, where is there a law that says they're entitled to maternity leave? And I would not so patiently explain to these other lawyers that when a woman gives birth, and here's what's always so fascinating and befuddling and outrageous to me. Still, when women give birth, according even to insurance carriers that don't give away money, they're disabled for at least 6 weeks after vaginal delivery, at least 8 weeks after a C-section, right? And right. So usually, 12 weeks is a reasonable period to recover from childbirth and bond with your baby, minimally reasonable.
Yeah.
So, and if you don't give that, if somebody broke their leg skiing or had a heart attack, you couldn't say to them, if you're an employer, you don't qualify for the FMLA, so you're not entitled to recover. It's disability discrimination. How does that not apply to pregnancy? Well, because it's women and because it's pregnancy, and it seemed to be, they would call it elective. You chose this. It's not our problem, businesses would say, right?
Right.
So there was all of this bringing cases, arguing, fighting for these people. We would usually prevail in those situations, but it was a constant, coming to employers. Women had to do with a cup in their hand, sort of begging for the flexibility to be with child, to have a life and a career. Outrageous. If men could get pregnant, we'd have a 12-month fully paid paternity leave policy, right?
Most likely, right? Yeah. I remember hiding my pregnancy as long as I could when I was in corporate years ago, right? My kids were 24 and 21. But yeah, I mean,
but isn't that outrageous?
I didn't want to disclose that because I was afraid that I would get fired.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the way a civilized culture that treats women equitably should work. So if I may get to,
how did you get
to June 27th of 2023, I've been saying all of, in 2024, just last year, but still, a year and a half ago, finally, we enacted President Biden signed into law the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Say it again for the people in the back. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is a game-changing civil rights, women's rights legislation. We're not going to see another one like it for some time, even though Catherine and I are working on a similar menopause one.
Yes, and I want to get to that too. Yes.
But this was huge. And this is, again, would not happen today, given the issues that we're all presumably aware of. And what this law does now, if you're pregnant and you work for an employer anywhere in the United States that employs at least 15 people, 15, not 50, 15, you are protected. Your pregnancy itself is a protected activity. You're entitled to special treatment. That's what it comes down to, actually, because you're pregnant, not just because you have gestational diabetes or hypertension or some other pregnancy-related medical issue, which used to be what you needed. Now it's just because you're pregnant, you are entitled to flexibility, reasonable accommodations. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically for pregnancy, but pregnancy itself is not a disability and doesn't need to be. So the civilized the notion behind it was not biologically natural life stages unique to women, or at least to those who menstruate, right? Because some trans and non-binary people. But in the main, we're talking about cisgender women assigned female at birth. Right. You're the only ones going through this. And by the way, when we get to menopause, unlike pregnancy, all women who live long enough go through menopause. So that affects everyone. Pregnancy. Exactly. That's why companies would sometimes say, hey, listen,
it's your choice.
That's right. Do it on your own time. Don't bother us with it.
Right.
But, anyway, that we're also, by the way, essentially the only nation on the planet that still doesn't think it's important enough to pay for maternity leave.
Maternity leave. Right.
So that's how, and we have very dismal, mortality rate for, maternal deaths and infant deaths way below what other less industrialized countries enjoy. But anyway, so the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act finally allows pregnant women during the 9-month gestational cycle, you're entitled to flexibility. You're entitled to light duty. You're entitled to remote work. You're entitled to whatever you may need. Again, if you sit all day, you can stand. If you stand all day, you get to sit. You need to drink, eat, you need to Your attire needs to change, obviously.
Yeah.
You can't drive an hour and a half each way during
Right.
you're part of it because you have to use the bathroom, for
Yeah.
example. You're entitled to that flexibility, specifically because it is just a reasonable period of time. It's a reasonable accommodation on all of these issues, which, by the way, a sister statute passed the same day, essentially, was the PUMP Act, which stands
Oh.
for Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for New Mothers. And that means 9 million more women now are entitled to express milk in the workplace for up to a year postpartum. Huge, right? I mean,
That is
and
huge because I did that in the bathroom. In the bathroom,
it
right?
can't be,
Like,
and
in
it
a
can't be
public
a bathroom.
Like,
Right. And it's not allowed to be a bathroom, a stall. It has to be private. It has to have a lock on the door.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of good things that happened in this like last piece of civil rights legislation that we've seen. So we should enjoy it and use it. So everyone needs to know that those days of sorry, we don't do that. We don't provide that or over. And that includes maternity leave, whether you're covered by the Family and Medical Leave Act or not. It doesn't mean it's paid, but it does mean you're entitled to recover from childbirth and get back to work, no worse for wear. So that's
fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic.
So that's fantastic. It's actually, it was like I took one long deep breath after that and sort of said, you know what? Take a day off now. Like we're finally hit that number. We hit it. It was awesome. So from there, and this is around the time I met Catherine, we started looking at, well, what's next? It's a natural progression. Well, how about those bookend stages
of
a women's reproductive life cycle, perimenopause and menopause?
Right.
Same framework. You read the legislative intent and the statute itself, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, they're talking about the same things.
Right.
And now it's affecting all women. Now, not all women, we all know, women will say, no biggie for me, right? I sailed through it.
Exactly. Oh, what are you talking about? Right.
And some women in, more my generation, let's say boomers that were deprived, an entire generation deprived of HRT because of that flawed 2001 study.
Right.
So, but just kind of saying, who even talks about this? Well, my mother's generation, it was like menopause. I don't think I said that word ever aloud.
Yeah, I don't think I went through it. You're like, yes, you did. Yeah.
Right. Well, that was just because you didn't even allow yourself to understand what was happening, or because nobody would have cared.
That's right.
But still, a large segment of the population goes through significant, challenging changes. A lot of times people don't even realize, women don't realize it sort of creeps up on you. It comes on early, right? Perimenopause. In your 30s, you could still experience it. And doctors, historically, today, poo-poo it, misdiagnose. They have no training. They say it's in your head. They prescribe psychotropic meds. So it's a sort of a challenging battle, but on all the levels and all the many symptoms, it starts with just don't feel like yourself.
Right.
But after that, there's numerous, all the major bodily functions can be involved, which we'll get to, because this is why menopausal and perimenopausal women today still have protections in the workplace, which we'll get to. But what we've been talking about, and what Catherine and I then drafted, based on the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, we drafted a Menopause Workers Fairness Act bill that some of our colleagues, we used to post these on LinkedIn constantly. Some other colleagues got interested. We ended up presenting this bill, at least the outline of what the Menopause Fairness Act bill should be, to Congress this past July at a midlife women's and menopause health symposium. A couple of Democratic congresswomen became interested in it. We've been working since then, until the election, let's say, on this bill with the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, with select OBGYNs that were part of our process. And we've been hashing out the bill that was going to be presented by this one Democratic congresswoman, who we're not even now permitted to name her, because it has stalled. Because for obvious reasons, because it ain't never going to pass right now in the next 4 years. But we're going to keep it alive as much as possible. But that's coming eventually if we survive as a democracy. And that's really what would be needed, just like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, to finally say, you know what, menopause itself isn't a disability either. It's a natural biological life stage change, but just like the celebrities that have finally come out and you say, Reese Witherspoon or fanning herself on camera, or people saying like, this is a real thing and we shouldn't be stigmatized and taboo as all women's, from menses to menopause, it's always stigmatized and taboo. Like it's icky. Don't talk about it with us. It's not our problem. It's your problem.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Jack, because there's a couple of things here. Awareness is key, which is why we do what we do, right? There are a lot of women that don't understand what's happening to their bodies. They don't even realize that they're in menopause because we haven't talked about it. And, there are several other reasons why, but awareness is key. And to take that a step further, when we experience those symptoms and when we recognize that it's menopause, there's still a lot of silence in the workplace. There's still a lot of fear that we're going to disclose that we're going through menopause, we're going to be discriminated against. And if we know that the Menopause Fair Workers Act, am I saying that right?
Menopause Fairness Workers Act.
Okay.
Menopause Workers Fairness Act. I'm sorry.
It's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. If we know that that's not going to pass in the next 4 years, tell me, if I am a woman and I'm experiencing menopause, should I be concerned about that? And if not, how am I still protected?
Okay, great question. And here's where kind of the rubber meets the road. And I find in posting about this on TikTok and LinkedIn for the last 2 years that no one else really lawyers particularly, no one acknowledges it. It's like, you know what, until this becomes something, Jack, Catherine, you keep doing what you do, but we're waiting on the sidelines for this. But in the meantime, here's the drum we keep banging because, and no one can contest this, is true. The symptoms of perimenopause and menopause often, actually, may I lead into this? You could say no, but I was going to read a brief direct message I got.
Yeah,
I get a direct message on LinkedIn from a person. I'm reading this with her permission. I'm not naming her. Okay. Here's what it says. Hi, Jack. Your post about perimenopause in the workplace resonates and raises questions about what I have been experiencing in my workplace. I am 49 and recently able to put the puzzle pieces together that I have been coping with perimenopause symptoms, misdiagnosed as depression last May to June. Meanwhile, I have been placed on a PIP, a performance improvement plan at work, for my inability to, quote, manage tasks, unquote, which I can firmly now say is a result of my symptoms. I have been successful in my career, receiving promotions and stellar reviews. This is the first time in my career mention of and being placed on a PIP came up.
Wow.
Okay, so this is what happens. Her younger, pisher male manager holding her to account for the insomnia that she's been suffering. She was experiencing emotional extremes, rage. She didn't know what was going on. That's why they were saying it was depression.
Okay.
It was this kind of whirlwind of hormonal activity or diminishment of it. And she didn't know what was going on. And she still hadn't even consulted a menopause aware practitioner to get a clue.
Yeah.
But a PIP, for those of you who don't know, a performance improvement plan is designed to manage you out of your job, right? So that's not good to be at that place. This is your economic lifeline, your job, right?
It's the documentation, right, that organizations need to start. Right?
Exactly.
Those that don't understand.
Exactly. But it is a setup to that. Most people don't recover from PIPs.
Yeah.
Because it's very subjective anyway. And they almost don't expect you to, because how demoralizing is it to get that? But here's the point to answer your question directly, what I told her when we consulted. The symptoms that she was going through, the symptoms that women go through, when they affect, and this is just the language from the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act of 2008, when those symptoms substantially affect or impair a major life activity, sleeping, thinking, walking, working, that's like everything, eating, you're already covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act and entitled from your employer to an interactive process, meaning a conversation about what you need to help you to stay gainfully employed, or symptoms that affect major bodily functions. One that's always affected is the endocrine system, the diminishment of endogenous hormones. You know what's going on, the wild fluctuations that are freaking people out, and all of it, the loss of libido, the loss of, it affects every major bodily function and organ. When you have that from a naturopath, an OBGYN, any type of aware practitioner, it doesn't have to be an MD, and you say to your employer, I'm going through this, I need this flexibility. These are bona fide issues that are documented. Your employer cannot poo-poo it. They can't dismiss it. They might want to, they might try, but they can't because of the definition I just gave. It's black and white. Under the ADA, there's no distinction for if it's, natural, if it's not, people think, well, but you're not really sick. It's not a disability, right? It's natural. Yeah, but the symptoms are covered. Right? That might be visible, but they're covered by the ADA. So I'm entitled to a reasonable accommodation unless you can prove that what I need, like a brief menopause absence, a change, ventilation, air conditioning,
or
a
break
fan,
to go to the bathroom,
more breaks,
change my pads, right? Exactly.
change in my clothing for those who have to wear hot uniforms.
Right.
The various fairly modest changes, or maybe remote work when you're going through a difficult period in a culture right now that does a lot of remote work. The company would have to say, oh, no, we can't do that and we won't do that because it's an undue hardship on our business. We can't afford it. It's going to put us on. That's a tough road for the company to hoe. It's difficult. And by requesting it, and here's what people need to know, by requesting this need for an accommodation, the requests itself are considered protected activity under our civil rights laws. So you can't be retaliated against. If they say, we're going to make it worse on you just for having the audacity to request that, that's illegal. Now, we also have the problem of women will often say, do I really want to raise these issues? It's like none of their freaking business.
Right. We hear this. Or I'm afraid they're going to anyway. Right? Or I don't want to be the one. I don't want to be the one.
Well, if you don't want to be, I know, but the problem is this DM I read, and that story didn't end well, by the way. So the point is, because she chose not to raise those issues. So it ended up
that happens. 1 in 10 women will leave the workforce voluntarily to not have to walk down this road.
That's a big number. Self-exiling. That's right.
Right.
Or get ultimately, canned.
Right.
So it's a huge issue. So this is what's empowering about it. But by the way, additionally, beside the disability component, it's only happening to women. And again, I'll say, yes, it happens to, trans men and, not some non-binary individuals and such. But vastly in the main, cisgender women assigned female at birth are the cohort, right? And it's women. It's not men, it's women. And it has nothing to do with affectional preferences or sexual orientation. It's just your sex. Women are dealing with this. So it's a sex-based, it's covered under sex discrimination laws. You have to give me this. This is a sex-based issue. And the clincher, the holy trinity of this is that for the most part, can happen earlier, but women are typically 40 plus. And 40 is the age, coincidentally, in our culture, under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, that we're protected from age-based discrimination. So you have this intersectional sex plus claim, sex, age, disability, these impairments that are temporary and natural, that entitle us to that interactive process, that cooperative dialogue. And by raising the issues, if you've got, dare I call it the courage to be that first person. But listen, if you think, especially if you think you're going to be managed out the door, if you think that it's not going well, you're just going to get fired like everybody else does and not get a dime. By raising these issues, if the marriage can't be saved, so to speak, if you're going to have to separate, that's how you can set yourself up to command severance, right?
Mhm.
That's how you can hold them accountable. And that's what makes the world go round, by the way.
Right.
And for all that documentation about whatever, because April, let's, face the reality here. In our corporate culture, 90% of us plus are at-will employees, if I may go into the slight
Right.
aside.
Right.
And at-will employees, to your listeners who don't know, means you don't have a contract of employment that virtually no one these days can command. You don't have a contract. You have an offer letter, maybe. You
Mhm.
don't have a contract. And if you have what looks like a contract or an employment agreement, it says right in it you're an at-will employee. That means you can be fired at any time for any reason or no reason at all. And you
Right.
can quit whenever you want. So we don't have any, we have one right. We have one right
Mhm.
in employment in the United States. That one right is the right not to be treated differently because of something about us that we can't change,
Right.
typically, right? And it has many subparts, this one right. Race, color, age, religion,
Mhm.
ethnicity, national origin, sex. Sex includes pregnancy, unequal pay, sexual harassment, etc., failure to promote women, but it's still one right. So
Mhm.
what people have to understand is if, as a woman of color, I'm just going to, no matter what it is, because
Right.
white privilege, male privilege are things in our culture. I vouch for that. We know that. So if you're experiencing disparate treatment, another way of saying discrimination in your workplace, microaggressions because you're Black, over 40, and again, specific to our conversation, because you're a woman of a certain age, or as my colleague Lauren Sheeran coined, a woman of a certain stage,
Mhm.
like the bookend stages,
Mhm.
perimenopause and menopause, and you need some TLC from your employer, you really should ask for it because, first of all, sometimes they do surprise us these days. It is a trending topic. Some companies are trying.
Yeah.
So if you do it, you might get the hookup.
Mhm.
And top it all off, your invocation, your requests in and of themselves, again, are thoroughly protected. And maybe, and listen, this is how laws get,
Yeah.
this is how it all happens.
Yeah.
We have to get a critical mass of interest, people
Mhm.
demanding it, right? This
The
is what
more
this is.
people that speak up, right? The more awareness, the more we request it. We had a question. The M Factor film is being shown across the country right now. We're on a panel, and someone said, how do we bring workplace training on menopause into our organization? Ask.
Ask, right?
Ask. You have to speak up and get other people to ask because it's the masses that are going to change the movement, right?
Right. Well, that's what happened
Yeah,
with the civil rights movement. That's what happened with the women's rights movement in the
right.
70s. So, it is all of a piece. And listen, in other places, I'm doing a podcast with Lauren Sheeran, who I just mentioned, who's an English, a British-based menopause coach and trainer and expert.
Hmm.
But in England,
Much
they
different.
actually much different, much better.
Hmm.
And some other kind, Australia, way ahead of us.
Yeah,
But everybody's way ahead of
absolutely.
us.
And hopefully, I mean, the movement is changing, right? There is change. We work with wonderful organizations who are really trying to fold in menopause support, menopause policy, and there are organizations that are doing a great job. There's a lot of work to be done for sure. That being said, are there specific industries that you're working with that, or you see are doing a better job than others in supporting women in this stage of life?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not at that, I'm simply the employee rights
Yeah, you're
person.
not seeing
And
trends, though. There's not.
I'm not seeing a trend. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah,
there's an answer to that. I just don't know it. So I can't tell you. I can tell you where maybe you would think it was in healthcare or for nurses, and that I could tell you it's not.
right.
So I don't know which. I think it's perhaps, unless Catherine, you got a sense of this. I think it's more company specific than it is industry specific. I don't know that, there are companies that are trying to do it, if only for the reason, not because they're such, bleeding heart liberals and progressives and care about women so much as they care about their own bottom line. And it's true, we lose industries lose billions of dollars to the loss of talent. When you talk about women at the
Right.
top of their game, at the top of their careers, being sidelined for all of this mishigas over nothing because we won't support them. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the rub. We don't support women. We don't, when it comes to health research, even women are, we don't test our medications on
Yeah.
women. It's mostly
Yeah.
for men. It's really, we all should be outraged much of the time. I
Mhm.
mean, again, reproductive rights in general. I mean, look where we are now, 50 years on
That's
after
right.
Roe v. Wade, we're back to, and we're back to, we're going back 50 years, and there's a bill pending right now that was authored by Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, called Dismantle DEI Act.
Oh, yes.
That's
Mhm.
just all about
Yeah.
taking us back to the good old days of women in the kitchen and people of
Yeah.
color in the back of the bus, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame to see the DEI initiatives being ditched with organizations for sure. If I am, if I'm an organization listening to this podcast, is there a takeaway here that either one of you would like to share? Jack, Catherine, you've mentioned so many. I mean, there is a financial benefit to supporting women. It's the right thing to do. It's the legal thing to do. What would you say to, XYZ organization if I'm tuning into this? What is
Well,
that?
I get that if it were Catherine and I, and if we were the co-senior VPs of human resource and had the authority in an organization, or even if I'm just the CEO of an organization, I say, you know what? My daughter raised this issue. My wife, I heard something, I watched something, and again, assuming a non-sociopathic CEO, I want to let's be the model for this. It's not like we're doing giveaways here. Let's be the company that we're getting written up as the most sort of pro women agenda company for our own. We want to be able to recruit the best senior talent, and we want to be known as, forget about the terms that are now not in vogue like DEI. We
Yeah.
just want to be known that we promote, women in leadership, because that's mostly my client base anyway. Women in
Yeah.
leadership, we promote, we retain, we encourage, we nurture, and it's not much. We're not asking for much. It's not doing much. So I would want to do that because I know that this is something that's great for our PR and our bottom line. So
Mhm.
why don't we be the first to do it? What would it take? It seems to be the same winds of the kind of this tension, which is why I think lawyers, though lawyers never comment on this when I talk about it. We're writing a white paper on this. We've been posting about it. I
Yeah.
have another LinkedIn post going up tomorrow on the Menopause Fairness Act and on. No one ever is willing to say, other than, yeah, that sounds right. I mean, the ADA, he's right, because no one wants to advance that notion until they sort of have to.
Mm.
But that to me, I don't get it. So to answer the
Yeah.
question, let's see one progressive thought leader person say, I want to take our company in this direction so that we'll be on the front page of whatever publication, and let's start a trend
Yeah.
because it's good for us, it's good for business, and it's good for women.
100%. Yeah. And the real question is, why aren't we doing it? Right. It is the cost to implement programs like this for an organization. We say this time and time again is minimal. And the reward on the other side, that return on investment is huge. Huge. Wouldn't it be great? I mean, perfect world. And I have my best cheerleaders here, I know. So your answer, of course, is going to be yes, but I'll ask it anyway. But wouldn't it be wonderful if every organization in the US was what we call menopause friendly? And we don't use that term lightly. It's meaningful. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And what would that look like? It would be a much different experience for so many people.
Well,
Catherine,
yeah,
what do you have to
Catherine.
I was just going to say that the frameworks are actually already there in organizations. And that's what I was actually going to point out to your last question, is that the extension that the Menopause Workers Fairness Act makes to the Pregnancy Act, your organization already has everything you need to do the Menopause Workers Fairness Act already. So you're not actually creating anything new in your organization that isn't already there. So what I mean by that is you are already legally bound. Your organization already legally has in place that when someone comes to your HR or your CEO or whoever the high-ranking official in management might be within your corporation, that you already know how to have conversations around finding reasonable accommodations. And so because that's already established, there's honestly no huge structural changes you need to be making. It's merely creating a safe environment where workers feel comfortable expressing that they are going through this stage of life and that reasonable accommodations are therefore something they need and that they're legally required to get. So honestly, companies don't have to change that much. It's really just about making a safe space and then extending the same reasonable accommodations you would to any other employees. Something that people find really interesting is that when we talk about reasonable accommodations for menopause, a piece of advice that Jack and I frequently give is that look at your coworkers and what reasonable accommodations they're already getting for other disabilities in your workplace.
Yes.
So Jack and I aren't telling women that just because you get menopause, you should go to your workers and ask for things that no one else in your workplace is getting or that are, way off the given track. Literally, it's just going to your employer and saying, hey, I noticed that so-and-so is able to do this. I also need that accommodation. How can we make that happen? So all the frameworks are already there, and it's really not that big of an ask. So when you say, what would the world look like if every organization was menopause aware, was more open to menopause accommodations? Well, the answer is it probably wouldn't look that different because the structural supports are there. It's just more people would be receiving those structural supports.
It's such a good point. Yes, such a good point,
Brilliant
Catherine.
point.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Yeah, we're not reinventing the wheel.
Right. That's brilliant.
And it's actually, I don't know how we top that. I really don't know how we top that. So it's a great way to end. I'm gonna ask one more question before we sign off. Is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know, that you would like to share that we haven't talked about today?
So my caution that I always like to throw out there to everyone is don't go making a unilateral decision to change your job environment without talking to your employer. And employers, similarly, it's a good idea to check in with your employees about what their needs are. This legislation, everything Jack was talking about today, is really based on the idea that we want employers and employees to be having conversations. Because when you have those conversations, you don't need Jack and I, because you're working things out with each other. So my big advice is to do not make unilateral decisions. Try to work within frameworks of organizations. And then sometimes, yes, you do need a little outside support because not everyone is going to be willing to work with everyone else. But a great first place is to come to the table from a place of, I believe my employer wants to work with me. I believe my employee wants to do a good job. How do we enable everyone to do that? And then hopefully Jack and I won't have as much of a job anymore.
Yeah.
And the one thing, April, that's also brilliant, Catherine, because I would add to that, and to answer your question about like one other thing that I don't think I stressed enough, was that if you are enduring and suffering, whether it's pregnancy or perimenopause or menopause, you raise these issues because you're sort of drowning alone and you see that your employer doesn't know. They don't know what you don't tell them. And they're going to hold you accountable for not sleeping at night and showing up dazed. So when you request these accommodations, as I mentioned, it's considered protected activity because you're saying, as a woman who's potentially is over 40, as a woman dealing with these disabling issues as a result of menopause, and they do affect major life activities or major bodily functions, if it can't be worked out, that's when you may need, and even if, Catherine or I behind the scenes to help you get out of there, but holding them accountable and get enough money to hold you over to the next job. Because by saying, I believe I'm being essentially treated differently as a woman in this life stage with these disabling issues. And then let's say they fire you on the heels of that. That is called something in our world that's called retaliatory discharge. If there's an adverse employment action like a firing or a demotion on the heels of a protected request for help because of a sex, age, or disability-based issue, that's considered retaliatory if they just say, sorry, no soup for you, sister, and then they fire you. So there are sometimes that's the way that we can hold Goliath to account with our little slingshot, the ping in the head to Goliath, because they have the law on their side, they have more resources than we do, is saying, you know what, game on. You're treating me differently. This is discriminatory and retaliatory. And now, you know what, I have a claim. These are the claims I'm looking to bring on behalf of people. We have, but they're very slow in coming. And eventually there's going to be a wave of them like there were with pregnancy. We're going to have a law, but like everything else when it comes to women, it's like pulling teeth. And you ask why? Because it's women. Because we live in a patriarchy. Full stop.
I agree. And I'm so glad that you both mentioned those last key takeaways. Catherine, you're absolutely correct. Making those unilateral decisions on your own without having those conversations with your employer is so important to recognize. And then to your point, Jack, employers and managers don't know what they don't know, especially if we have a male who hasn't been around females, who doesn't know about menopause. Again, it kind of comes back to that awareness and how important that is. They don't know what they don't know. So if you don't speak up and you don't mention that you might be suffering from XYZ, that's when your performance improvement plan begins, right? I had a personal situation with someone very close to me that had an employee that was going through perimenopause who just wasn't herself. And, that was the conversation. I think I'm going to have to start making notes, right? I'm going to have to start documenting. And it was, the next thing in the conversation was, well, do you think, how old is this person? Do you think that it might be menopause or perimenopause? Yeah, no clue. Right. And this is someone that is very close to me that has had conversations for the past decade about menstrual health and sexual reproductive health at the dinner table. So, if you have a situation like that and someone that isn't aware of menopause, we have a lot of work to do there as well. But those are really important takeaways. If we have listeners that need assistance, how might they find you? And are there other organizations that they might be able to reach out to?
Yes. Well, first of all, for us, the firm is, the shorthand for the firm is Tuckner Sipser. Weinstock and Sipser is the longer hand. We're based in Manhattan in New York City. We have another office upstate New York. Catherine holds down the fort for us in California.
Right.
We also, but we're not, the only game in town these days. If you're in another state, it's always best. It's always best. I mean, you can certainly, I've represented women in 22 states so far. It's not like we can't, but it's generally best to seek a lawyer in your jurisdiction so they could go to court for you. I'm licensed in New York and Connecticut, Catherine in California, that, we don't cover all the ground. And there is an organization called the National Employment Lawyers Association based in San Francisco.
Okay.
And there are affiliates in every state, essentially. You could just find a plaintiff side, an employee rights, not a management lawyer, employment lawyer, somebody experienced. It's also easy to kind of Google these days. But you could find us either calling us, at our 212 number, or you can email us at info@womensrightsny.com. I don't know and you could find Catherine and I on LinkedIn. I'm at Jack Tuckner, Catherine Crider, DM, email, call. You need
there's no excuse, right? You can get a hold of us. And you post a lot on LinkedIn, so I just want to shout out there as well. Connecting with LinkedIn, I'm going to do that as soon as we're done today so that we can follow you and your white papers and this menopause support and advocacy that we might be able to get involved with. Thank you so much for being on the show today, sharing your expertise and your passion. I know I speak for everyone out there who's going through menopause and the menopause journey right now. Thank you. We appreciate the work that you're doing. Lovely to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
your work, April.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Medovia Menopause Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. Medovia is out to change the narrative. Learn more at medovia.com. That's MIDOVIA.com.